Hello and welcome to today's video abstract where we're going to discuss the effects of caffeine on resistance exercise. This is a recent review of the research. This was published in Sports Medicine in 2021. Caffeine is a highly popular ergogenic aid. Studies have evaluated the effects of caffeine on various components of exercise performance, including resistance exercise. Given that it is a rapidly developing field of research, the aim of this article was to provide an updated overview of the most recent studies exploring caffeine's effect on resistance exercise. So what are the main mechanisms by which caffeine may provide an ergogenic effect on resistance exercise? Well, it is generally accepted that caffeine ingestion enhances performance due to its effects on adenosine receptors, i.e. via central mechanisms. Caffeine has a similar molecular structure to adenosine. Therefore, after ingestion, caffeine binds to adenosine receptors and alleviates fatigue sensations, ultimately resulting in improved exercise performance. There is some data to indicate that caffeine may also enhance performance due to its local effects, i.e. directly on the muscle itself. These ideas have been developed using animal models. However, studies that use isolated muscle fibers commonly apply a caffeine dose that would be toxic in humans. So in humans, it appears that the main effects are generally via central effects of caffeine, i.e. binding to the adenosine receptors. In a range of studies, participants performed resistance exercise tasks to failure after consuming 3 or 6 milligrams per kilogram of caffeine. And they demonstrated that several neurophysiological parameters were improved following caffeine ingestion, including mean torque and training volume. And these were improved by enhancing neural drive, confirming that caffeine elicits the majority of its effects on the nervous system. So what are the acute ergogenic effects of caffeine on resistance exercise performance? Well, based on the current research, it can be concluded that caffeine supplementation in relative doses enhances upper and lower body 1RM strength. The ergogenic effect of caffeine on 1 repetition max strength does not seem to be dependent on the training status of the individual. However, the effects tend to be small and likely have the greatest practical relevance to athletes competing in strength-based sports, even though they may be of value to other sports where maximum strength is an important muscular quality. Over 20 new studies have explored the effects of caffeine on different muscular endurance outcomes. An ergogenic effect of caffeine on muscular endurance was observed in the majority of these studies, with the effect sizes ranging from small to large. When examining the difference in means, the increase in the number of repetitions per set following caffeine ingestion generally ranges from 1 to 4 additional repetitions. The positive effects of caffeine on muscular endurance have been established for single and multiple set protocols. Additionally, the ergogenic effects of caffeine on muscular endurance do not seem to be load dependent, as they are observed in studies using loads of 30, 60, 70, and 85% of 1 repetition max. The number of studies exploring the effects of caffeine on velocity and power in resistance exercise has been linearly increasing in recent years. A meta-analysis published in 2020 also explored the effects of caffeine on velocity in resistance exercise. Caffeine ingestion had a significant ergogenic effect on mean and peak velocity across all training loads in upper and lower body exercises, with the effect sizes ranging from moderate to large. So overall, based on the current research, it seems that caffeine has a considerable ergogenic effect on velocity and power in resistance exercise. And in some cases, these effects seem to be greater than the effects observed in muscular strength and muscular endurance. So what about the long-term effects of caffeine on resistance exercise? Well, an emerging research area is related to caffeine's long-term effects. Given the overwhelming body of evidence supporting the acute ergogenic effects of caffeine on resistance exercise performance, researchers have started exploring if these acute effects, when applied in each training session, also impact long-term adaptations to exercise. Increases in muscular strength and muscle size tend to favor greater training volumes. Therefore, as caffeine ingestion pre-exercise enhances muscular endurance, i.e. total training volume, a logical rationale can be made that caffeine ingestion before every exercise session will positively impact these long-term adaptations. Two studies have explored this topic and provided some support for this hypothesis. In one study, the researchers randomized 14 resistance-trained participants to two groups. One group ingested 3 milligrams per kilogram of caffeine 60 minutes before exercise, while the other group ingested a placebo. And they found that the caffeine group improved one repetition max in the bench press by 13 kilograms and in the squat by 27 kilograms. And these gains were significantly larger than those observed in the placebo group. In another study, essentially using a very similar design and including 9 participants in the caffeine group, again 3 milligrams per kilogram of caffeine 60 minutes before exercise, and 7 participants in the placebo group, they found that gains in one repetition max strength were similar between the groups, but still that the group that consumed caffeine seemed to have a more consistent gains in the force velocity profile test. So overall, while the current research supports the positive effects of long-term caffeine supplementation, we do need to look at future longer duration studies, because these studies only lasted 3 to 4 weeks. So what about the effects of caffeine on resistance exercise in women? Well, the majority of studies that explored the effects of caffeine on exercise performance included males as study participants. And this was recently highlighted in a commentary that summarized data from 362 primary studies on caffeine and exercise, and found that only 13% of participants included in the studies were females. While it is clear that caffeine ingestion enhances resistance exercise performance in women, it is not yet fully elucidated if there are sex-specific responses to these ergogenic effects. Several studies directly compared the effects of caffeine on muscular strength and endurance between men and women, while reporting similar responses between sexes. Phases of the menstrual cycle are one methodological aspect that warrants consideration when conducting studies in women. Nevertheless, caffeine metabolism may vary according to the menstrual cycle phase, possibly impacting caffeine's ergogenic effects. Even though a variation in caffeine metabolism has been observed, some have questioned the practical significance of these differences, and follow-up research also suggested that the menstrual cycle does not significantly alter the pharmacokinetics of caffeine. So in summary, recent data shows that caffeine ingestion is ergogenic for resistance performance in females. The magnitude of these effects seem to be similar to that observed in men, and caffeine's ergogenic effects do not appear to be moderated by phases of the menstrual cycle, even though this topic requires further research. So what are the optimal protocols when it comes to caffeine supplementation for resistance exercise? Well, in relation to caffeine dose, it is commonly suggested that optimal effects are obtained when consuming between 3 and 6 milligrams per kilogram. When discussing the minimal effective dose, it seems that the minimal ergogenic dose of caffeine for resistance exercise performance is around 1.5 milligrams per kilogram. Overall, consuming lower doses of caffeine appears to be comparably ergogenic to consuming high doses of caffeine with fewer side effects. And what about the way we take caffeine? Well, caffeine is most commonly provided using capsules, and the effectiveness of caffeine on resistance exercise is mostly established with this form. Nevertheless, several studies have evaluated the ergogenic effects of other forms of caffeine, including chewing gum, gel, coffee on resistance exercise. Based on the recent evidence, it seems that caffeine chewing gum and gels may enhance resistance exercise performance even when consumed 10 minutes before exercise, owing to the faster absorption with these sources of caffeine. And there is also some additional evidence supporting coffee's ergogenic effect, but further research with alternate caffeine sources on resistance exercise is still needed. Finally, what about timing of caffeine ingestion? Well, the effects of caffeine timing on resistance exercise performance have been explored in one study, and in this study, participants ingested 6 milligrams per kilogram of caffeine in capsules 2 hours, 1 hour, and 30 minutes before exercise. Generally, it was found that the greatest performance benefits were observed when ingesting caffeine 60 minutes pre-exercise, likely because caffeine in the plasma concentration was almost at its highest point at this time. Still, for some isokinetic testing outcomes, an ergogenic effect was observed when using caffeine for 30 minutes pre-exercise. So in summary, it seems that when consuming caffeine in capsules, the optimal timing of ingestion is around 30 to 60 minutes pre-exercise. Still, as I mentioned earlier on, when you're taking caffeine with gum or gels, A shorter waiting time from consumption to the start of exercise, for example 10 minutes, also produces an ergogenic effect on resistance exercise performance. Thank you very much for watching. For further videos, please follow us on social media or subscribe via YouTube.